Welcome back to another book review. My name is Sam, and in this one we're talking about the second book in the Silo Trilogy by Hugh Howey called Shift. I was double checking the cover because for some reason I was forgetting. But Shift. Like its name suggests, shifts from what we had in the first book, and this one doesn't actually have the main character of the first book, Juliet, until the very last page of the entire book. Also, there will be spoilers, just so you know. So it's good. It's a good book, but I don't think it's as good as the first one. It's definitely a bit more meandering. It's definitely the second book in a trilogy. It sets up a lot. I'm excited for what we're gonna get in the final book. But basically, this one follows a few characters. One of them being Donald, who is actually in present. Or not, I guess it's in the past in reference to Wool, but present day America. He's a senator, drafting plans because he used to be an architect for Senator Thurman. Donald is basically crafting what would end up being the silo, and he ends up being almost the head architect for it, but without knowing, because until the very end, until he actually goes into the silo himself, he believes that the silo is actually temporary housing for workers for the nearby uranium power plant, whatever. I'm forgetting some of the terms. The point is, he was duped into working on it, and then we have this final big moment near the middle of the book, or not middle, but let's say near the end of the first third, where there is basically apocalypse, and he goes down, and he's, dragged away from his wife, and he's waking up a bunch of years later for his first shift in Silo 1, where he's working to basically handle what's happening in nearby silos. Or the idea is that in Silo 1, they are basically the watchtower looking over every other silo. And whenever a silo, one of the 50 of them basically falls apart, they make the choice to either reset it, which uses this mind-altering drug to make him forget all the bad stuff, or if they don't reset it, they just destroy it. And this weighs on him a lot, and by the end of the book, he changes quite a lot. I don't know if I like his character. He's done some bad stuff, and he is weak in his own right, but it's interesting what he's gonna do going into the third book, because he is definitely the closest they have to a leader in Silo 1. The book is hard to follow at times because it goes between I want to say present day America, where everything is good, and then 2145, where his first shift happens, then 100 years after that, and 100 years after that, and all the while at some undisclosed year, we're looking at Silo 18, where they have a character named Mission, who is a porter, basically a courier, who goes up and down the silo carrying deliveries. Him and his other sort of young friends, if I remember at the age, they're like something like 18, 19, 20, something fairly young. And they basically stage a revolution in a way, which in Silo 18, at this point, it takes place sometime before, if I remember, like 100 years, sometime before the happenings of book 1. They basically get a reset rather than a whole destruction, and that paves the way for eventually Juliet to be born and do stuff and lead her own silo to revolution in a good way this time. I like it. I like the book. It's about 100 pages more than the first one, and I feel like with all the happenings, it started to feel like it was dragging on, and with some of the characters, their conclusions felt not very fulfilling, I guess, which is probably by design. There were some great revelations throughout, quite a few. Hugh Howey is great at setting up some stuff to later knock it over and make you go. It's basically, he's like, I'm gonna set up these blocks, and you're like, okay, and like 100 pages later he knocks over the blocks and you want to cry. And it's like, he's really great at getting you emotionally invested in stuff, and then like flipping the switch and turning it on its head. But not every revelation sort of hits as much as it should. It's a little hard to follow the revelations that Donald comes across as the book goes on. So I feel like, I think it's because of all the time jumping back and forth, trying to keep it together, it's not as impactful. So in this one, it's definitely more of like a 7 out of 10 rather than like an 8 or 9 out of 10. But that doesn't mean it's bad. It's definitely above average. I really enjoyed it. It set up a lot for the next book. Near the end of the book, we have Jimmy Parker, who, if you remember, is Silo from the first book. Or, sorry, not Silo, Solo. He calls himself Solo because he is alone. It's actually interesting how they describe him giving himself his name. He was all alone years after being tucked away after Silo 17's destruction, which killed off almost all the people. He's walking around, and then he goes back to his old classroom where it all started, and he's writing a poem, and he finishes it with "I am Jimmy," but he changes to "I am Solitude." But then he erases the end of Solitude and writes "I am Solo." And I thought that was really nice. It didn't feel, I don't know how to describe it. It didn't feel like it was trying to seem more grandiose than it was. It just felt like a dude all on his own, giving up his name because basically his name attached had a lot of baggage attached because he kept thinking about his parents and all the friends and family that he left behind all those years past because he wasn't able to do anything. But and by becoming Solo, he's basically shrugging off all of his old life. And then later on he gets a cat, and I have a cat. So hearing him sort of grow this bond with the cat was really nice. And it's actually fun. It's nice. At a certain point, he drops the name Solo and becomes Jimmy again because he's no longer alone. He's himself. He feels comfortable with himself. But after 8 years with the cat, which is, I'm glad he had that much time, he's back to being Solo again. And I think this sort of transition between Solo to Jimmy to Solo is really great because it recontextualizes the end of Wool, where he's talking with Juliet before she goes back to her own silo, and he says, "No, I think I'm going to be Jimmy again," because at the time it felt sort of, it definitely felt sort of lame, but when you recontextualize it with all of this story, how years and years of being alone created this sort of persona for himself, to finally reclaim the name of Jimmy again, it's like it actually adds emotional weight to it, and I think it's really great. There's a lot of that where you're recontextualizing stuff, so it's actually Donald who is talking to Lucas Kyle through the radio when Lucas is being inundated as or inducted as the shadow for the head of IT. So it's actually interesting seeing these pivotal moments from the other side, but it's done in a way that doesn't ruin them or lose their meaning, but rather reinforces their meaning and or recontextualizes them in a good way. Sometimes when books try to sort of retread stuff that had already happened, it gets really either boring or it loses the meaning, or it'll reduce the impact because it doesn't feel like there was actually any tension, but there was definitely tension. So all these moments in the past of all these moments, definitely it's good. I like it. I really enjoyed what they did with the order to sort of try to give some form to this grandiose big thing. And I like the aspect of when a bunch of people in government work on something, something can be made without anybody realizing it. And it was pretty interesting. I didn't like some of the interactions Donald had with the whole upper echelon of the world order in Silo 1. It definitely feels, I don't know, it feels weird. But I do like how Donald was the perfect point of view character to show the passage of time. Every time he came out of a shift, he would see these changes, see how the floor tiles in the middle of the hallway would be worn away after he wakes up, after all these years of people walking straight down the corridor, and how there'd be essentially these, you know, parts on the wall that were all scuffed up near people's shoulders and hands. And it's just these little moments where he wakes up and he sees this stuff, and it's basically like, I think really nice seeing that change, because it's like, oh yeah, like these silos aren't made of unobtainium, they're made of metal, they're made of concrete, they're made of wood, and years upon years upon years, 300 years of living is going to wear them down. And it leads into the whole idea that Thurman, the character that Donald works for, never intended anybody to live out of this whole thing. It's interesting. Also, without getting too much into it, I like the aspect that it's not nuclear radiation like I originally thought outside. It's rather nanotech. It's nanobots basically doing the opposite of healing. They're just they destroy anything, but there are certain people that are immune to it because reasons. And it's good. I like it. It's interesting. It's a concept I've heard of before, definitely, but I haven't heard of it used in this context, and I think it's really interesting, because that explains why there's a part where, spoilers again, but I gotta say it, Donald wakes up his sister Charlotte, who was a Marine, or no, I don't know, I think more Air Force, but whatever. The point is, she would fly drones, so he actually has her fly a drone out of Silo 1, because they have drones that they could use to keep this people in the silos in check, drop bombs on them if they really need to, and takes the drone and has it fly out really far, and right before it crashes, because it's being picked apart by these nanobots, he sees on the cameras green, lush, and it finally makes sense. It's like, oh, yeah, there's not an infinite amount of nanobots in the world. The destruction, the nuclear fallout looking irradiated land where it's really gray and gross and looks bad, it looks like that because it's filled with tiny machines trying to destroy everything. So it sort of makes sense that it only expands so far because they're not infinite. It's not the idea that it's sort of like a self-replicating thing, but rather it's just this sort of plague released upon the land. My cat's freaking out, so I'll wrap this up. But basically, it's good. It's a great concept. I think it's interesting. There was a lot of good setup in this one. It does meander a bit. I do like the characters. In general, I'll call it a 7 out of 10. I'm looking forward to reading the final book. I'll probably get that done in the next couple days. But yeah, in general, I like it. It's pretty good. But I'm looking forward to having the final book have a lot more of Juliet. I'm interested in seeing what a silo that doesn't get destroyed or reset can do under leadership that is not content with having things stay as they are. So I think it's going to be very interesting. And it might involve her digging into other silos and basically not taking them over necessarily, but spreading everybody's efforts. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'll let you know when I finish that. Thanks for watching, and yeah, have a great day. See ya.